What is going on, everybody? Welcome to our final mock draft of the 2024 NFL draft season. A bittersweet moment here, but we're going out with a bang, a 3-round mock draft. Not sure how long this thing is going to be. Don't think you guys are going to complain, but buckle up. This is going to be a fun one. I do have some notes before we get started. I do want to remind everybody I will be live right here on YouTube for all 16 hours of the draft, whatever it might be. Live reactions and analysis to every single pick. So make sure you come join here on YouTube for the live stream. I also wanted to let you know, a lot of you have been asking about linebacker rankings, safety rankings, tight end rankings, all of the remaining positions. I have broken down the rest of our position groups over on the Fully Inflated Football podcast. So we've got every position covered there if you want to get the rundown before draft day. And then the last thing is, if 3 rounds isn't enough for you, for some reason, if you're a real draft sicko, I'm doing 7-round mock drafts for all 32 teams, division by division, really throughout the next couple of days here on my Patreon. So if you want access to that, along with my full draft guide, which has rankings, write-ups on every player I've watched so far in this draft, 241 players as of this recording. Going to be doing some last-minute scouting, trying to get up to 275 players in that bad boy by Thursday's draft. So if you want access to that, you want to support my channel, it's all available via the TFG Draft Insider package there over at patreon.com/thatfranchiseguy. I appreciate you checking it out and all of the enthusiasm here for draft week. But let's go ahead and get started with the 3-round mock draft. I'm going to have this as mostly a what I would do mock draft, as I like to do. But full disclosure, the first 7 picks are going to be a little bit more predictive. What I would do is mostly in line with the top 7, but obviously the first 7 picks are going to kind of set the tone for how the rest of the draft could play out. So I wanted to keep the top 7 kind of in line with what we expect to happen, and then go a little bit more off of what I would do from there. So there's a little disclaimer for you, but let's go ahead and get started with the number 1 pick for the Chicago Bears. No surprise here, Caleb Williams. I want to at least give you, 30 seconds here, Bears fans, because we've been glossing over this pick. But Caleb really is a special quarterback prospect. This is not Mitch Trubisky. This is not Justin Fields. This is not like the Bears are going to screw up another one type of situation. I genuinely believe in the not just success of Caleb Williams. I think he has a chance to really bring some greatness to Chicago. He is closer to a generational prospect than he is to, a Bryce Young or a Drake May or one of these guys that is probably the number 1 pick in most drafts. Like, we have those guys most years. Caleb is a step above that. So you're getting a special one there in Chicago. But then for the number 2 pick, I know I said I was going to try to keep this realistic. I still think Washington's going to take Drake May. I do. It's shifting more towards that this week. There was some confrontation between Jaden Daniels and their visit, where they had all of these prospects out, took them to Topgolf together in a very untraditional top 30 visit, set up there with the new ownership in Washington. Not only am I going to be a little bit stubborn here and feel that an NFL front office is going to walk away from the film and have a better grade on Drake May, but he's younger. I think there's a little bit of bad blood with what just happened out there, and I think he's going to be their guy. The market is shifting towards that. I'm going to stay a little bit stubborn here, and really it's kind of I'll believe it when I see it type of situation that Drake May isn't the second best quarterback in this draft, because to me he's just such a clear-cut tier alone between Caleb Williams and the rest of these guys. So I could be dead wrong about that. We'll see what happens in a couple days, but I'm going to keep Drake May at number 2. And then this pick right here is really where I was trying to keep it on par for like what is probably going to happen, because this pick is kind of where the draft starts, if you will. I would not take Jaden Daniels right here for New England. I probably wouldn't trade up for Jaden Daniels if I were the Giants, but I do think one of those 2 teams will be picking Jaden Daniels with the number 3 pick. And I think he's got a much better chance of succeeding if it's a team like the Giants with a Brian Daboll there trading up to get him. I would be worried if Jaden Daniels goes to New England at number 3, which is what we're going to do in this mock draft. because I think that's the most likely situation. I'm not going to say he's an absolute bust or he couldn't work out. I'd be an idiot if I sat here and said he doesn't have great upside, the scrambling ability, the accuracy down the field. Even some of the pocket presence is pretty good. But I just have my concerns with how easy he had it at LSU, a lot of the bad tape that's out there with Jaden Daniels. I think he's a lot more raw than he's given credit for. I think this would be a situation in New England where he's got to start right away. So I'm going to be a very kind of, I can't even really say 1 foot in, 1 foot out. If the Patriots do this with Jaden Daniels at 3, I'd be more like leaning out, but peeking my head in would probably be a better way to describe it. I understand you got to get that quarterback. At least you feel like you got to get that quarterback when you're picking in the top 3 of a good quarterback draft. But that's just my opinion on it. We're going to keep him at number 3, though, to New England. Then we got Arizona at number 4. Look, there's a lot of talk about Arizona trading out of this pick. I certainly would not bet that that's what they're going to do. I think they are loaded with draft picks, right? What they're not loaded with is blue chip talent. And if you trade down, you're giving up a Marvin Harrison. You're giving up a Joe Alt, depending on how far down you want to go. I don't think the price of admission to trade down is going to be worth passing on a Marvin Harrison here. At some point, you got to be like what the Houston Texans got last year, and you just got to get franchise-altering players. Marvin Harrison is just the absolute missing kind of like puzzle piece for what they're constructing down there in Arizona. So I think if Marvin's there, you're going to have to give me a hell of a lot of first-round picks for me to move out of this spot. So we're going to go Arizona there, number 4, and I think that's what they're going to do as well. Then we have the Chargers at 5 for a brief second, because now that J.J. McCarthy is on the board at 5, nobody traded up to get him at 4. I think that this is a locked-in agreement between the Chargers and the Vikings. This is their guy to come up for J.J. McCarthy. I think the reason this trade hasn't happened yet is because we don't know if Drake May is going to fall. We don't know if the Giants are going to trade up to 4 and take J.J. McCarthy. Why would the Vikings trade up to 5 if they don't know what quarterback's going to be there, right? Or maybe from the Vikings position, if Washington does go Jaden Daniels at 2, maybe they would be willing to give up even more picks to go get a Drake May. So to me, this is the most likely way for this thing to play out. But the second the Vikings went and got that Texans draft pick, it to me screamed they're moving up for a guy at 5. And I do believe it's J.J. McCarthy. I think the way that the Michigan's offense really is translatable to what they're doing in Minnesota. He's, lacks reps and all that, but in that offense with that coaching, those receivers, very good tackle duo, like I really believe not just that the Vikings are going to do this, not just that J.J. McCarthy could have success, but I've actually reached the point, and I didn't think I would have said this 2 months ago, I've actually reached the point where I would make this move myself. Now, the fact that they have already put themselves in kind of a chips on the table type of situation when they made that trade with the Texans helps that thought a little bit, but I do believe in this move for the Vikings. Then we got the Giants at number 6 with Malik Neighbors falling to you there. That's the pick. And by the way, if I were to flip this and the Giants traded up with New England at 3, I would just take Malik Neighbors if I were the Patriots. So I do think the quarterback with a 3rd pick and then Malik Neighbors with the 6th pick is probably where this is trending in terms of how this is going to play out. But talk about a missing chess piece for the Giants. They have interesting slot pieces. I kind of like what they've done, bringing in some different pieces for their offensive line and a good offensive line coach. But they don't have that juice offensively. If you're not making that move for a quarterback, let's actually give Daniel Jones like a real NFL offense around him, maybe for the first time in his career, and see if he can't have a Brock Purdy type of season, a Jalen Hurts type of season where he looks pretty good in a pretty friendly situation. And then we got the Titans at number 7. I mean, come on, we got 100 picks to do here today. Joe Alt, perfect piece to slide in there at left tackle. I think this is as big of a lock behind Caleb Williams going number 1 in this draft class. And I'm just going to say for Titans fans, you couldn't be any luckier that this blue chip prospect of a left tackle is likely going to be just sitting there with how this board's going to play out. The only team that could really screw this up, I think, would be the Chargers at 5 if they don't trade down. But then at number 8 for Atlanta, I think this is prime real estate for a trade down. From Atlanta's perspective, I mean, you've got 2 great edge rush prospects in Latu or Turner that you could be thinking about here. You could be thinking about Quinyon Mitchell here. You have big need at that other corner spot. So there's that side of things where you could move down and still get essentially the same level of player for cheaper and pick up some picks. But more importantly, everybody and their mother knows Chicago is going to take Rome Odunze at 9. So with the next 3 picks, whether it's Chicago jumping up a spot, the Jets jumping up from 10, or the Chargers jumping back up from 11, any of these teams I think would be willing to make that jump for this last remaining kind of blue chip offensive piece here in Rome Odunze. Again, it could be any number of those teams, but I'm going to have that be the LA Chargers in this situation. I think Chargers fans are going to like this. We've seen this now in I think 2 of the last 3 drafts, right? Miami traded down and then traded back up for Jalen Waddle. The Arizona Cardinals traded down and then traded back up for Paris Campbell, kind of split the difference of trading down from that top 5 pick. And I think this is a really good strategy for the Chargers, where you're giving up the 3rd round pick that you got from Minnesota in that trade down, the 3rd round pick next year, and a 5th round pick this year to come back up to 8 and get Justin Herbert, his number 1 wide receiver, a wide receiver in this draft class that does fit the sort of on-brand Michigan approach of we're going to get more physical, we're going to get stronger and tougher. Rome Odunze definitely brings that as a wide receiver prospect. I also think he's got a lot of parallels to Keenan Allen, who's no longer in the building, so you can kind of have a similar style role in that offense with Herbert. So Chargers fans, you get a wide receiver in this mock draft, and I think this is very possible to happen on draft day. Then the Chicago Bears at 9. Obviously a little disappointed that it's not Rome Odunze, but you're just going to have to trust Keenan Allen can stay healthy. And I think at this point, shift towards the defensive draft board here. And man, Byron Murphy is that 3 tech that Matt Eberflus has been looking for such a long time. I know it hurts a little bit to swallow that they're not going with their hometown Johnny Newton here for the Bears, but I really do think Byron Murphy is a next level up as a prospect. I think he's right there with Quinyon Mitchell and Laiatu Latu for the best players in this draft class. I think even potentially a guy that is being underrated by the general mock draft world. I do think the NFL and a lot of NFL teams are going to have kind of top 10 grades on Byron Murphy with him as one of the best, if not the best defensive players in this draft. And I think him in the first 12 picks feels pretty safe to me. You obviously want to give Caleb Williams as much help as possible, but you've done that through free agency, getting Keenan Allen or with a trade rather. Giving him a great defense to support him is going to be a nice relief for Caleb Williams after what he went through at USC. So then we got the Jets up at 10. Obviously, Brock Bowers has been a very common pick here for the Jets, and I'm going to stick with that. I really like the Bowers fit here for the Jets. It's tough. I know offensive line is something a lot of Jets fans want, that extra insurance there for 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers. I understand that. The way I see it is not only is Brock Bowers just the best player on the board, but you basically addressed your offensive line needs in free agency. You addressed number 2 wide receiver in free agency, which is effectively what Brock Bowers is and can be for you. So you've addressed both of those needs to the point that you have flexibility here at 10. Either Mike Williams could go down or Tyron Smith could go down, and you're going to wish you had drafted in that direction, right? If Mike Williams goes down, you wish you had Brock Bowers. If Tyron Smith goes down, you wish you went with a Troy Fautanu or whatever. But a big difference maker for me is, look, if you really are swinging for the fences, what if both those pieces, Mike Williams and Tyron Smith, do stay healthy? And then Brock Bowers is a guy that's going to set you over the limit. With him stepping in that big slot, that Allen Lazard role as a tight end, as this explosive run after catch threat, a guy that's going to allow you to neutralize any offensive line issues by getting that ball out quickly and letting him do the dirty work for you. But If that O-line stays healthy, you got Mike Williams, Garrett Wilson, Brock Bowers, Aaron Rodgers back. That's really how the Jets can hit that grand slam and actually win a Super Bowl here. So I do like the Brock Bowers fit a lot for them. Then Atlanta, where we traded down, it really could be Turner or Latu. In terms of what they're going to do, odds are it's probably Turner because that's how the NFL thinks. But I do think Atlanta is very much in a win-now state of mind. And I also think with Latu, which is going to be my pick here, if he clears those medical checks, it's not like he's got bad knees or his ankle keeps popping up as an issue. It's just, he had a neck issue that 2 years ago they said you should retire from football. I don't think he's missed a game since then. So if that checks, it's hard for me to see a team actually having a higher grade on Turner because I think Latu has a good physical upside and is just such a better player right now. So, it could go in any direction on Thursday, but certainly as we're definitely getting down the board a little bit more, shifting a little bit more towards what I would do, I continue to just love the Latu fit for the Atlanta Falcons because they're ready to go right now. They're not trying to waste any time for Dallas Turner to develop a counter move, which could take 2 years. Latu's got 6 counter moves in his back pocket. But then we got the Denver Broncos up at 12. Look, I would love to trade down here, and it's certainly something you'd look at. I didn't see a great trade-up partner here, but also with Denver, I know they just acquired Zach Wilson today. I mean, they've swapped 6th and 7th round picks. We'll see if he makes the roster. I don't think that impacts what you do here at 12. It's just a random lottery ticket and a cheap backup. But, with Zach Wilson and Jarrett Stidham, you've kind of put yourself in this desperate situation where you almost enjoy the peace of mind of just taking your guy at 12 and then figuring it out from there. So again, a trade down could be in play for Denver, especially without a 2nd round pick. But I do still believe that Bo Nix is and should be their guy. I like Bo Nix. I don't think this is quite Kenny Pickett or certainly, Desmond Ridder. I think he's got more to him than that. He really does remind me a lot of a Brock Purdy where he's so good on time. I think Bo Nix has a better arm and ability to throw the deep ball than Brock Purdy, but similar in the sense that if it's not there, quick first, second reads, he's going to extend plays with his feet. I really think Sean Payton's going to like him. And there's a little bit of peace of mind in the sense that, look, the Vikings gave, after the Texans trade, they gave up a 2nd round pick this year and next year, basically, a 3rd round pick next year, and the 11th overall pick to go up and get J.J. McCarthy at 5. If you're Denver, you can just stay put, use the 1 pick on Bo Nix, and, again, build from there. I don't think there's this massive gap between J.J. McCarthy and Bo Nix. I think Bo Nix has a higher floor. McCarthy has the higher ceiling. So totally fine with them just staying put at 12. And I think Broncos fans, the more and more they've been mocked Bo Nix at 12, I think the more and more, or I should say the less and less Broncos fans I see saying that's a bad pick. The one guy that I could see them taking if he were there would be Brock Bowers. I wanted to shout that out real quick. Just because Sean Payton loves those big slot tight end hybrid types, I think he could look at Brock Bowers and be like, I can't pass that up if he's there at 12. But then we got the Raiders at 13, now with 5 quarterbacks off the board. I mean, you'd have to be a really big Michael Penix stand to stay put here and take him at 13, especially when the Raiders did go out and sign a Gardner Minshew, right? They're not quite in that desperate situation that the Broncos are in. Every time I look at the Raiders roster, I see those holes on the right side of the offensive line. And the more and more I do these mock drafts, the more I'm pretty damn sure that they're going to take a right tackle here. Now, I'm going to stick with Amarius Mims. I'm going to stand by my guy here. I'm just really impressed by his tape. I think he gets too much crap for the lack of playing time. I think he's green. He's not raw. I actually like his pass protection better than J.C. Latham and Fuaga. And his traits are just insane. So I wouldn't be stunned if the Raiders themselves made this pick. Now, if I were betting on who they would take here, it's probably Fuaga or Latham, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised if Mims is their guy either. But he is my guy here at 13 for the Las Vegas Raiders. Then we're going to get this tackle run officially up and started here. Olu Fashanu to the Saints at 14. I mean, man, this has become really, since the Ryan Ramczyk news came out that he's dealing with some really serious injury issues, this has become about as big of a lock of a draft pick as the Titans taking Joe Alt at 7. So I do really like how he fits as a left tackle for the Saints. I mean, Derek Carr is one of the 3 or 4 quarterbacks in the NFL that I think blindside protection is essential, because that dude doesn't have a lick of pocket presence to save his life, literally. So get him the highest floor pass protector in the draft at 14. Then at 15, the Indianapolis Colts. I've been going with this pick for a while, and I've become more and more convinced not only that it's the perfect fit, but that they're actually going to do this, and that's Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU for the Colts. The Colts, out of any NFL team, love themselves athletic freaks, and that is Brian Thomas, who ran a 4.33, over 200 pounds at 6'3". But this is a pick that is going to let Shane Steichen do exactly what he had in Philadelphia, where now that you have a true vertical threat. Look, Alec Pierce is a fine player, but he's not putting the fear of God in teams that if you run single high, you're going to have to deal with, wide receivers screaming wide open down the field. Alec Pierce isn't that guy. Brian Thomas is. And you put him on that Colts team with Shane Steichen and Anthony Richardson and that run game and that offensive line with Josh Downs and Michael Pittman and a tight end room that I think is being underrated when all these people keep saying Brock Bowers to the Colts. I like Jelani Woods coming back. I like Kylan Granson. I like Alec or Andrew Ogletree, who got hurt last year. You could go Bowers, but I think those guys can play. What I'm getting at here is when Steichen was in Philadelphia, they had that dream setup with the run game, with the running quarterback, with these vertical options at wide receiver, with these underneath options at wide receiver. Shane Steichen was a god at forcing the defense to basically decide how they were going to defend you, and then he was able to go the other way and beat you with whatever the counterpunch is to your strategy, and then communicating that plan to the young quarterback and Anthony Richardson and how to attack it. It really would put this whole thing together. So his over-under, Brian Thomas, is 15.5 for the NFL draft. Look out for the Colts to take Brian Thomas at 15. Then we got the Seahawks at 16. This is probably the pick that I keep making that Seahawks fans say, oh, turn it off after the Seahawks pick. Like, oh, they would never do this. And it's Graham Barton at 16. I'm going to stick with it. Look, Seahawks fans said that when you would put Devon Witherspoon in the first round of the Seahawks because, oh, we don't draft corners in the first round. I've seen the quote. John Schneider says, I don't value interior offensive line. Well, it turns out the league is changing. They're now paying guards $20 million, and you look at the Seahawks roster, they haven't really given themselves much of a choice. Their roster's in very good shape, with the exception of the interior offensive line. And the other thing is, look, Graham Barton is an absolute stud. He is a top 20 player in this draft class for me. 3-position flexibility as well. Is this the most likely thing for the Seahawks to do? Maybe not. But I wouldn't be surprised if they make an exception this year to take Graham Barton at 16. Then we got the Jags at 17 with Quinyon Mitchell still sitting out there. This has got to be his floor. And I wouldn't be stunned if the Jags were a team that moved up, maybe with Denver, to take Quinyon Mitchell. But I don't know if they feel like they have to. I don't know. That's something to keep an eye out for, I guess, as a little mini call here. But yeah, I mean, he could do everything they need from Ryan Nielsen's new defense coming over. And when you look at kind of how they've filled out the interior of the offensive line, they've invested in tackle, they paid a bunch of money to these wide receivers. Corner is that position group with a defensive coordinator coming in that needs press man corners. It does feel pretty damn likely that Jacksonville's going to go corner in the first round to me. Especially if they haven't really addressed it. They signed Ronald Darby, but that's a Band-Aid, right? But then we got the Bengals at 18. This, to me, is going to be Talise Fuaga out of Oregon State. Could be him or J.C. Latham. Pick your poison there. But I really like the Fuaga pick. I mean, Latham's very much in a similar path here as well. But this is the exact style of offensive tackle that the Bengals have showed us they're interested in, right? They have these behemoths at tackle with the Trent Brown and Orlando Brown. they want a guy that it's like when Tom Brady was playing, he wanted these big tackles. It's like, just don't let the pocket cave in on me. If you get beat to the edge, I have elite pocket presence. I can step up and seal that angle for you. Joe Burrow has that exact same trait. But additionally, in their run game, they've become much more of a head-up kind of gap blocking scheme. They love these big maulers. So Fuaga fits that. I think J.C. Latham would also fit that. So that could be the pick for the Bengals here. I prefer Fuaga. I think he's nastier in the run game and doesn't have that gaping weakness in pass protection when it comes to his foot speed that I think Latham has. But the other reason I love this pick is he's going to start at guard, I think, in his rookie season. He might just be so effing good at guard that they just leave him there as like this all-pro, top-of-the-market type of guard for a long time. Because I really do think Fuaga can be a good tackle. I think he could be an elite guard with his play style and size. But let's get to the Rams at 19. I mean, this also kind of feels like a floor of sorts for Dallas Turner, especially if this is how the board's going to play out. When was the last time the Rams had an opportunity to get a player like this in the building through the draft? Like, they wanted Brian Burns, which is a funny comparison. A lot of people have tied Dallas Turner and Brian Burns' skill sets together. But yeah, man, at 19, you've now got Turner, you've got Byron Young, you obviously have Kobe Turner. Last year, you're hoping Bobby Brown can continue to take a step up. You have an exciting young defensive line now with Aaron Donald retiring. It's a much bigger need than it's been because you just can't count on Aaron Donald to carry the load there, right? So it makes a ton of sense. Then the Steelers have picked 20. I went back and forth on this. I know the offensive line need is pressing, but there was a player here that I thought about as a really good fit for the Steelers, and I'm going to end up picking him here, and that's Johnny Newton out of Illinois. You know, look, we can talk about how the Steelers need to revamp this offense, and that's how they're going to, take that step forward. I like the Arthur Smith signing. I think they've done some good stuff with the offense. There's going to still be opportunities to address that later in the draft as well. But at the end of the day, the Steelers are going to be great if they're going to be great because of their defense. That is the identity of this team. And the spine of this defense has become a joke, right? They have, I don't want to say neglected the interior of the defensive line, but they certainly have not replenished what was a godly strength for them when they had Tuitt and Hargrave and Cam Hayward no longer in his prime. Let's get another one of these guys in the building. I know they took Benton in the second round last year, showed some flashes. He's a piece of this plan here. But, I mean, come on. Larry Ogunjobi, Montravius Adams, Dean Lowry, none of these guys scare you. But you now put Johnny Newton out there with Benton, with whatever you get left from Hayward, with TJ Watt, who's not getting any younger, by the way, and Alex Highsmith. Like, now you're getting back to the days 2 or 3 years ago where you looked at the Steelers pass rush and you got off the bus ready to play these guys, and you're like, how the fuck are we going to block the Pittsburgh Steelers today? Newton is the pick that gets you back to that identity. So Steelers fans, you'll just have to let me know in the comments if I sold you on Jerzon Newton there, who my pro comp for, by the way, is Javon Hargrave. And while you're down there, can we get a verdict? Johnny Newton, Jerzon Newton, what are we supposed to go with here? I haven't heard the official word on that from Mr. Newton in Illinois. But let's get to pick number 21, the Miami Dolphins, Troy Fautanu. Absolute bargain to get him at 21 at this point. I mean, it's just a testament to how good this draft class is. There's going to be guys in these first few picks in the 20s where it's like, man, that guy should not be available in the 20s, but because this is such a good draft class, it's going to happen to a couple of these guys. But this fit is so sensational the more you think about it. I've talked about how I think Fautanu is a tackle, and I will stand by that. I think long-term he is a tackle here for this Dolphins team, but I've also said that if he's going to play guard, I want him in one of these Shanahan-style wide zone move blocking systems. I don't know how the smaller Fautanu is going to translate to guard if you are more of a duo inside gap power running type of system. If you want these guys to do that bucket step, to reach block, to get them on the move on these sweeps that Miami loves, that crack toss that they run, like Fautanu at guard in this system absolutely will work. And then in the 6 games that Armstead will inevitably miss at left tackle, there you go, seamless transition. So he's kind of a dream for Miami at 21. but there's no way they let this player get past you at that spot. But then the Eagles at 22. Tough call here between Cooper DeJean and Terrion Arnold. Two top corners still available here at this spot. I do think for Vic Fangio, Cooper DeJean is the pick. I think he's a better zone corner than Terrion Arnold is more of a man type of corner. But I think DeJean's ability to step into the slot as that off-zone slot corner for them, obviously, in season 1 is going to be perfect for Vic Fangio. It allows them to stay in those base nickel fronts, to keep their safeties deep, because Cooper DeJean can be a quasi-linebacker from the slot, kind of in that Jalen Ramsey slot corner role. I get that he didn't necessarily do that with Jalen Ramsey in Miami because they had another guy doing that in Kader Coho, but I do think the inspiration would be there from how the Rams use Jalen Ramsey in a similar style system, but we're getting off the rails there. That's why I love Cooper DeJean in this defense. I think long-term he could either step outside and play outside corner down the road, or you flip him to safety at some point, or you just keep him at slot corner where as long as Vic Fangio is the defensive coordinator or you're running a similar style system, that slot corner is going to be out there every single play. So, really, really enjoy how he fits inside this specific scheme and is a value fit at 22 for the Eagles. Then we have the Chargers up at 23 with that Vikings pick. This is going to be J.C. Latham for me. And honestly, even though I'm not a big Latham guy, I love this fit because he's going to play guard in year 1 with Trey Pipkins at tackle. And similar to what we said about Fuaga for the Bengals, but to an exaggerated degree, I think Latham is going to be so good at guard that you're just not going to mess around with kicking him out to tackle. And I think you're just taking a Pro Bowl caliber guard here at 23 that's going to protect the crap out of Justin Herbert. This is also totally in line with the John Harbaugh approach here, where they're trying to get more physical and Midwest out there in LA, if you will. I know Latham's from Alabama, but the philosophy there is in line. So even though I'm not the biggest Latham guy, I do think this is an excellent fit for this player. And if he figures out a tackle and I'm just wrong about, his kind of pass protecting deficiencies out there, that's great too. Then we have the Dallas Cowboys at 24. Jackson Powers Johnson. Not trying to shortchange you Cowboys fans, but very self-explanatory pick. The value lines up. They don't have a center currently, so I don't think any Cowboys fans are going to complain about this pick. Then we have the Green Bay Packers at pick 25. Terrion Arnold is slipping in this situation, which I don't think is absurd in such a great draft class. A corner that runs 4.5, getting pushed down just a little bit, but I do think Green Bay stops the slide here. I love him as a slot in Green Bay in this situation, where I think Terrion Arnold's upside will be at his highest because of just, so long speed. But Green Bay wants to get to be much more of a press man style defense, and I think Terrion Arnold really fits that for them. Then we have Tampa Bay at 26, a very common draft pick here. Jared Verse, very self-explanatory. I think totally fits Todd Bowles' scheme as well, as kind of a pocket pusher there. Then we haven't had a trade in a minute here, but with Arizona up at 27, so they didn't trade down from pick 4, but I am going to trade down at pick 27. I think with the edge guys gone, with the 2 interior D linemen gone, and all the top corners gone, you're starting to look at like developmental O linemen, interior O linemen. It's you're kind of reaching if you're going need at this point. I like the trade down here for Arizona, and I think since we're doing 3 rounds, Cardinals fans are going to like how this plays out. This is where I'm going to trade up, though, for Michael Penix, and the team moving up to get him is going to be the Las Vegas Raiders. Look, I still like Michael Penix. I just don't know if I like Michael Penix at 13 when you're passing up on the top level prospects in this draft class, right? So for the Raiders, you're going to take that 44th pick plus a 3rd round pick and spend that on a Michael Penix, who's now going to be into a competition with Gardner Minshew. Doesn't have to play right away, but maybe he does win that job. You're setting him up now with Devontae Adams, with a better offensive line. Now that you've drafted Mims, I like some of the ancillary playmakers there as well. You've got Michael Mayer, you have Jacoby Myers. I liked the flashes we saw from Trey Tucker. whose vertical ability is going to be a great fit with Michael Penix. So, I still have a kind of top 50 grade on Michael Penix, and to move up and get that fifth-year option, I think is well worth it here for the Raiders. And I'll also add, part of what makes Davante Adams so special is some of the chemistry ball, the back shoulders, and the kind of tear-dropping late hands, over-the-shoulder catches. That's everything that Michael Penix did with Rome Odunze. You're not quite going to get that type of explosiveness with a Gardner Minshew. So with that specific player there for you, you got to kind of believe that Michael Penix might work out well here. And you can just picture him in the jersey, right? So I think that's an exciting fit. Let's go to the Bills at 28, where they're going to take a Donnie Mitchell. My favorite reasoning for this is for no reason other than this stops the Kansas City Chiefs from getting him where he could be a monster developed in that system. But for similar reasons to why you think he'll succeed for the Chiefs, you don't want to discount Josh Allen and that kind of environment for a receiver like a Donnie Mitchell to develop. They will rely on him to do some stuff as a rookie, but they've made enough signings with guys like Curtis Samuel. You have Shakir there. Mac Hollins is an underrated player that just had to deal with Desmond Ridder last year, so you'll get to mix him in, and then year two, you might see that big boom from a Donnie Mitchell. But then we have the Detroit Lions up at 29. The more I think of this fit, the more he just screams like this is going to be their pick at number 29, and that's Kool-Aid McKinstry for so many reasons. Number one, he's their style of corner, right? They have made it very clear. We don't care how fast you were. We don't care really what your size was. They have Amik Robertson, who they signed. They have Emmanuel Mosley. They had Cam Sutton last year. They don't really care how fast you were or how big you are. They just want to know how physical you are. And, I mean, that's Kool-Aid McKinstry, is that bump and run style, the true bump and run, where he's going to keep banging with you down the field. And even if he doesn't have the long speed to run with you, he, like a Carlton Davis, is going to use those arms to kind of, subtly attach them and use them to slow you down in a way that doesn't draw a lot of flags. So stylistically, he's totally their type, fills a need. He'll come in and, you'll see what you get from Amik Robertson. You'll see what, Emmanuel Mosley can look like coming off the injury. But I would expect Kool-Aid to win that job within his rookie season. You're pairing him again with Brian Branch in the slot there. So many things to love about this fit, and he just screams Detroit Lions. So we're going to go with him, even though he isn't my number one corner on the board at that point in time. That player is going to come off the board at number 30 here to the Baltimore Ravens. I'm going to go with Nate Wiggins here. I understand the desperate need at offensive line for the Ravens, but the more I look at their depth chart, I see a lot more needs than just O-line. And if there's a massive gap in talent and also a position of need, I'm not going to just feel required to draft the offensive lineman. So we're going to, again, take Nate Wiggins here. You look at their secondary, I love Marlon Humphrey. He's an injury-prone player. But you got, Brandon Stevens was fine last year. You have a Darius Washington in your slot, Jalen Armour Davis, Demarion Williams, Arthur Mallette. Come on, what are we doing here? This is not a great secondary in Baltimore. And Nate Wiggins is a potentially great football player. You're hoping that, you get him in this tough culture. You can get him to kind of put on 10 pounds. I think he plays tough. It's just the run defense can be bad at times because he is so slender. If I could get him up to 185, you could have one of the best cornerback duos in the league with Nate Wiggins and Marlon Humphrey there. I just think the player is too talented to pass up at this point, as other teams have been kind of scared off by the injury risk there. But then we got the Niners at 31. They're going to take the other player I was considering for the Ravens in Jordan Morgan out of Arizona. I like him for the Niners stylistically. I think he's a great wide zone blocker, really good get off and mobility for everything the Niners want to do in their run game. But I like his pass protection technique as well and his positional flexibility. I think he could play any number of the guard or tackle needs that they have, and they can find a good home for him there. He's one of these guys that his arm length is like 32 and 7/8 inch arms, where the NFL threshold is usually 33 inches. So to play tackle, so they might slide him inside, but I do think he could play tackle, right tackle for them as well. But then to wrap up the first day of the draft for the Kansas City Chiefs, this tackle run has been too dramatic for them to take a tackle here at 32 for me. I would have taken Jordan Morgan if he's there. This is rich for me to take Tyler Guyton, though, when wide receiver is still a need, and you got great options here. I really thought pretty hard about who's going to be the sort of best fit in terms of what the Chiefs need here. There's a bunch of different stylistic options with these wide receivers. When I really thought about it, I felt like Ladd McConkey was going to be the best player for what they need right now in that wide receiver room. You've got Rashee Rice, who's kind of your playmaker type, a lot of, drags, screens, was second in lowest average depth of target in the league. You have your true vertical threat in Hollywood Brown. You obviously have Kelsey work in the middle of the field, but your short to intermediate separation guy, a reliable possession receiver that can also get open, is missing here. I think you're getting what they were hoping to get in Sky Moore, in Ladd McConkey here out of Georgia. And I also think Ladd McConkey is underrated in terms of vertical speed and the ability to take the top off the defense as well. And when teams are so distracted by Hollywood Brown, we might see 4 or 5 times a season Ladd McConkey getting lost behind a safety and catching one of those deep crossers, those deep posts, or just burning up the sideline and being a little bit more of a vertical threat than potentially anticipated as well. So I really like how he fits for the Chiefs. But now round 2, I'm not worrying about how long this video is going to get. I'd rather we cover everything and you guys can come back and pause and, rewatch whatever you got to do to consume the content. But let's get to the 33rd pick for the Carolina Panthers. This is where I'm going to go with Xavier Worthy, the deep speed threat out of Texas. Really struggled between him and Xavier Legette. I like both these players for Carolina, but I've described this before. I think you've addressed the O-line. You've addressed the, kind of short option, short to intermediate options for Bryce Young. One big problem for Bryce in Carolina last year was by the time they got to the second half of the season, there was such a lack of a vertical presence on that offense that he just stopped looking vertical altogether. I think you put Xavier Worthy in here with that deep speed, you've got to take the top off the defense and start looking vertical as well. So you're kind of putting the whole thing back together for Bryce Young. It's not like he didn't love throwing deep just a year ago at Alabama, right? And you go back to when Bryce Young had Jamison Williams, that would have been 3 years ago. That was a really good connection there. So I think you can get something similar there with Xavier Worthy. Then we got New England up at 34, getting a weapon here for Jaden Daniels. Going to go Ricky Pearsall. I think getting a separator in the building here has got to be priority number 1. I do think I know Patriots fans don't want to hear this necessarily, or I guess you probably should want to hear this, but I'm not fully done believing in Tyquan Thornton. I know he was drafted earlier than a lot of people thought he would be, and he's had some drops, but he hasn't had any quarterback that can launch the deep ball to him. He's got that now in Jaden Daniels. So I'm going to hope maybe a year with Jaden Daniels, you can get that at least field stretching vertical threat. You have Deuce Douglas, you have your tight end, but we again need that separator in the short to intermediate game. To me, that's Ricky Pearsall. Fits perfectly with what they need. Then we have the Arizona Cardinals at 35. This one is going to be a total planting my flag. I'm higher on this player. Jonah Ellis to the Arizona Cardinals at 35. I realize he's probably not going to go in the top 50 of the NFL draft at this point. Daniel Jeremiah just dropped his big board. Jonah Ellis was at 135 or something. Now I strongly disagree with the placement there by Daniel Jeremiah, who I have the utmost respect for. And maybe the injury stuff is worse than I'm understanding with him. But he's my tied for 4th ranked edge rusher in this draft. I think he's a much better pass rusher now than Chop Robinson, who's, spoiler alert, going to be our next pick. But, maybe I'm crazy for this one, but I'm a huge fan of his game. If this is me picking for Arizona, which at this point in the mock draft, we're fully into what I would do territory. And Jonah Ellis would be the guy I would, fall on the sword for here at 35, and we'll just have to wait and see how that goes. But Washington, as I just mentioned, is going to take Chop Robinson here, so Dan Quinn gets his bursty Penn State edge rusher in Chop Robinson. I don't think this guy is Micah Parsons. I don't think he has nearly the power profile, but I do think he's a talented player. Can get thrown into what is actually low-key a very deep rotation here in year one with all the different guys they've signed, and then a very good coach there in Dan Quinn to hopefully develop that skill set and turn him into potential steal with the 36th pick, because his traits are insane. It's just he doesn't really have much of a skill set right now. Then we got the Chargers at 37. There's like a bunch of Michigan players they could be thinking about here, whether it's Chris Jenkins, Mike Sainristil, Junior Colson, who's going to be my pick for them. I love Denzel Perriman, who they signed. He can't really stay healthy. Dion Henley was a third-round pick last year. None of those are going to stop you from looking at linebacker. This to me is it's a value play at this point. I have Junior Colson as a top 50 pick on my big board, but the obvious connection with this scheme coming over for the Chargers, hiring Kevin Minter, the defensive coordinator there, you get the sort of on-the-field captain in Junior Colson, which I think is going to bring some underrated value on top of the physicality, the run defense, all the reasons they loved him at Michigan. So wouldn't be surprised if this is the pick they make on Thursday, and it obviously would be the pick that I would make. Then we got Tennessee at pick 38. This is more Tyler Guyton range for me. I know we took Joe Alt, but look, the Titans need 2 tackles. That's why Joe Alt is such a no-brainer at 7. I'm just not a Nicholas Petit-Frere believer, Titans fans. I'm not. I think he stinks. I know Dylan Radin started to show some flashes last year, but if he's legit, he's going to become expensive here, coming up on the last year of his contract. So I don't think you have to play Tyler Guyton right away. You have those 2 names we just mentioned, and maybe Dylan Radins is just okay at right tackle, which is probably close to a best case scenario, but you don't want to pay him long term, so you have your future planning there. The main reason I like this, though, is you get to put Tyler Guyton with Bill Callahan, one of, if not the best offensive line coaches in the league, and then you could potentially have this nasty, freaky duo with Guyton and Joe Alt playing their natural positions, left and right tackle. Then we got the Carolina Panthers up again at 39. Gonna go with another one of my guys here, Michael Hall Jr. out of Ohio State. I mean, just as a starting point, I love how he fits next to Derek Brown, who can play the nose. Michael Hall, definitely gonna be more of a 3-tech. I mean, I broke him down, I think, pretty well on my interior defensive line rankings video. If you really want to be sold on this draft pick, he's a top 40 player in this draft class for me. I love him as a pass rusher, but he's put on about 15 pounds since he was at Ohio State. I thought his run defense tape was underrated in terms of his instincts and block shedding ability. It was just he was playing at 280-something pounds at Ohio State and was never going to hold up against double teams. Well, he said, F that, I'm putting on weight. And I think is going to be a better run defender in the league than he was in college. It reminds me a ton of Justin Madubuike. So I do think he is a very good use of the pick that you created this hole by trading away Brian Burns. You freed up the cap space to go make other moves, but you did create a pass rushing need. To me, Michael Hall is much better than any edge player you're going to be able to grab here at 39. Then we got Washington at pick 40. Going to go Blake Fisher, my next best offensive tackle prospect. They've brought in some Band-Aids on that offensive line, but they're going to need some more long-term solutions after drafting Drake May. Then we got Green Bay up at 41. This is going to be Cooper Beebe for me. He screams Green Bay Packers with one of these 2 second-round picks. They love these, positionally flexible offensive linemen, guys with tackle and guard experience. They have a huge need at right guard. I also think Green Bay is going to want to run a lot more power type of stuff after bringing in Josh Jacobs. I think Cooper Beebe running more gap stuff is good in the league, just as he did at Kansas State. Houston Texans at 42. Going to surprise some people here. But hey, when I had the Texans taking Quinyon Mitchell in January, Texans fans thought that was a reach. Maybe with the same pick that was moved down to the 42nd pick, and I say Tyke Smith here at 42, you're going to say it's a reach. But maybe this player ends up coming off the board a lot earlier than he's projected in a lot of the mock drafts and stuff right now, kind of like a consensus 4th-round guy. Look, I just don't know how, with all due respect to the draft analysts out there, I just don't know how you watch Tyke Smith's tape and say that's a 4th-round player. I know he's older. He took a little bit longer to kind of get on the field and find a role in Georgia's defense. But I see Antoine Winfield Jr. as a slot corner. And just like Antoine Winfield, just like a guy he reminds me of as well, Javon Holland several years ago, played a ton of slot in college, but I think has the skill set to play more safety as well. This is also 100% on brand with who DeMeco Ryans likes, either as a slot corner or as a safety. He kind of likes the same style of dudes in that role. Think what we thought we were getting in Jalen Petrie. Literally exactly what Jimmy Ward is, which is not a bad comp for Tyke Smith, though I think Tyke Smith is a better coverage player, or at least has better potential as a coverage player than Jimmy Ward. K'Wan Williams, when they were in San Francisco, that's who Tyke Smith is. So they will find a place to play him in year one, whether that is at slot corner or at safety. But, you've got, Desmond King, older Jimmy Ward, who's having a hard time staying healthy, Jalen Petrie nearing the end of his contract. You're coming up on some needs there in that sort of spine of the defense for the Texans. I hope I sold you Texans fans on this being obviously your first pick in this draft, being what many will consider a reach. He's not a reach for me. He's a top 50 player and tied for my number 1 safety in this draft class, who just happens to be a dream fit schematically for the Texans. Then we got the Atlanta Falcons up at 43. We addressed edge in the first. I think they filled out their offense perfectly well in free agency, and we are going to go into the secondary now and take Andrew Phillips. They have a real opportunity for him to come in and compete for a starting job right away. Love his stickiness in coverage. Both the Falcons and Raheem Morris have shown that they don't necessarily care about how big you are. They think you can play outside corner, right? Like Clark Phillips stepped outside a little bit for the Falcons, and Raheem Morris had to work with corners of all shapes, sizes, and speed with what the Rams were providing for him. So I definitely think he can find a home probably as an outside corner. I've heard some people suggest slot corner for Andrew Phillips. I actually disagree there. I think his tackling would be a huge problem in the slot, but I do like him on the outside. Then we have Arizona with that pick they got from the Raiders. No joke, this is who I would have taken at 27, so that's why the trade down is so great. Christian Haynes out of UConn. This is why I looked to trade down, right? I knew it was going to be a reach at 27, but this to me was going to be the best pick for them. I have always said, get me as many good but short offensive linemen as you can find me for Kyler Murray. I do think that matters with his height. Christian Haynes is under 6'3", but beyond that, he's the best wide zone run blocker maybe in this draft at any position, and I don't say that lightly in a class with Joe Alt and Fuaga and Fatanu. But Christian Haynes is an absolute monster on reach blocks that they ran a ton of at UConn. Well, that's what Arizona wants to run right now, is that Shanahan-style wide zone blocking scheme. Fills a need, and man, he's going to be good in that system. The fact that he's 6'2" is just an extra plus. Then we got the Saints up at 45. I'm going to go with Javon Bullard here, safety out of Georgia. All of a sudden, the Saints needs, they don't have a lot of superstars left on that team, but their team is actually pretty filled out. You could consider another tackle here, I'm not going to lie, but a lot of those guys are gone at this point. So I'm just looking into that secondary where right now they are slated to start Jordan Howden, who was a day 3 pick out of Minnesota. Showed some good stuff. But with him and then Tyrann Mathieu not getting any younger, I think getting a safety like Javon Bullard definitely fits what they're looking for with just that kind of positionally flexible safety, someone that can play free safety, one play, run some quarters, run some man-to-man. I think Javon Bullard would be their style there, and certainly a value enough at pick 45. All right, then we're going to have one more trade here with the Indianapolis Colts up at pick 46. I think every Colts fan knows who I was going to be targeting here. It's Kyrie Jackson. They've been tied together for a long time. If the Colts don't take a corner in the first round, they've shown in this regime and with Gus Bradley going back throughout the years, he feels like second, third round is a good sweet spot for corners, not necessarily first round, just given the big physical press zone corner. But I don't think they need to take him at 46 either. I think you could entertain trade downs and get some extra draft capital. So we're going to do that. We're going to move down just 10 spots, targeting Kyrie Jackson later. And the team coming up here is going to be the Dallas Cowboys. So they got their center earlier. We're actually going to come up for a running back here in Trey Benson, who at this point, I think Trey Benson is my 30th overall player in my big board. At this point, Trey Benson has become a value at the running back position. I think you're getting something close to what the Jets got in their Breece Hall in the second round, or what the Seahawks got in their Kenneth Walker in the second round. I really think that Trey Benson is every bit as talented as those prospects were, and you put him in Dallas where they have a need and an opportunity. I mean, he could be an absolute monster superstar for the Dallas Cowboys. I really believe that. My high-end pro comp for him is Jonathan Taylor as well, who was a second-round pick. So I'm a big believer in Benson, definitely a player I would trade up for. And for the Cowboys, you're not actually losing any draft picks here. It's going to be a pick swap where you're moving down from that 87th pick down into the middle of the fourth round there. So you're really just flipping 87 for 117, and the Colts are going to move down to pick 56 here. We got the New York Giants up at 47. I'm going to go with Kalen Carson, the cornerback out of Wake Forest, someone I'm very high on. Definitely not going to be seeing him this high in your public mock drafts and stuff. Wouldn't be surprised, though, if the NFL is a little bit more immune to the idea that, okay, he didn't go to the Senior Bowl, he didn't work out, but wouldn't be surprised if the NFL had a second-round grade on him before all that stuff, and they're not going to let his inability to participate because of an injury hurt him all that much. Honestly, isn't that dissimilar from what Deonte Banks was as a prospect coming out of Maryland, where he's got the size, he's got the speed, he's got, physical press man tape, he's got good zone tape. His big problem is he just doesn't really always get his head around when he's targeted deep to find the ball in phase. So now you kind of got two of those guys. Obviously, he's not quite as good as Banks was last year, but I like him for similar reasons. And man, this secondary right now, you're looking at a competition between Nick McLeod, Trey Hawkins, Darnay Holmes, Aaron Robinson. Like, they definitely need some corner help. So we're going to go Carson there at 47. Then Jacksonville up at 48. I'm going to go with a little bit of a style at wide receiver that they don't have yet. We got that corner in the first round, but we're going to take Keon Coleman out of Florida State, staying in state there. But Trevor Lawrence has not had a big-bodied trust wide receiver. When he gets in a pinch, can I throw this guy a jump ball? Can I throw him a back shoulder? Can I lead him towards the sideline? They haven't had that guy. He had that in T. Higgins at Clemson. I don't think Keon Coleman's quite what T. Higgins was, but there are similar skill sets there. And I think they would really find a good way to use him in Jacksonville, even though they've kind of filled out like the Gabe Davis role. They've got Kirk. They still have Zay Jones. I think there's a pretty easy role for Keon Coleman in this offense. And in time, obviously, your plan is to phase those guys out and let Keon Coleman rise to being more of a featured player. Then, speaking of T. Higgins, we have the Bengals up at pick 49, which I might as well say I wouldn't be stunned if we see either a Brandon Ayuk or a T. Higgins trade here on draft day. I didn't do that in this mock draft, but it's something to keep an eye out for. But I am going to address playmaker here for the Bengals. It was a little bit hard for me because I actually like the Mike Gesicki signing for them and think he could have some success, but it was just a one-year deal. Counting on that is tough. And the Bengals don't have a ton of huge needs, so I kind of just thought best player available here at a relative position of need. And for me, that was Jatavion Sanders out of Texas. I think it's a good setup where he can compete with Mike Gesicki. Maybe the two of them can try to prove who can run block the best, because that's neither of their strengths. But I like how he fits for similar reasons to Mike Gesicki, but I don't know that Mike Gesicki's like a long-term answer either. I think with Tyler Boyd on the outs there. They definitely have an opportunity for a big-bodied slot to exist there. And I think in time, Sanders will prove to be worth the investment. And that's kind of how the Bengals approach things anyway, right? They don't always fill immediate needs. They're more looking at 2-3 year type of needs. So Sanders fits that. Then we've got the Eagles up at 50. We're halfway through this sucker. We're going to give them a developmental offensive lineman in Kingsley Suamatea. Just a ton of traits. Not too far off of what like Jordan Mailata would have been. Going to cost you a little bit more because he's actually played more American football than Jordan Mailata. But, you know, that O-line coach and their ability to develop these guys, you don't have to play him right away, right? They have Lane Johnson there for the time being, but eventually this could be a Lane Johnson replacement. Then we got the Pittsburgh Steelers up at 51. Malachi Corley, to me, is the dream fit for this offense with Arthur Smith coming in. He's gotten all those Deebo Samuel comps, and Arthur Smith wants that sort of, I hate to just call him a manufactured touch guy, but it will be a lot of that, where Corley is so good on the bubble screens and the jet sweeps and the creative ways to get him the football, but also the crossing routes off of play action, where I think he's underrated as a route runner. I know the Deebo Samuel comps are lofty, but this is a very similar style of offense to what San Francisco runs now here in Pittsburgh, and a very similar style of player with a very clear role projection. I think he would get a monster workload in year one, which I know is heresy to say that for an Arthur Smith coached player, but he's an Arthur Smith type of player for sure. And then the Los Angeles Rams up, Kamari Lassiter going to be the pick here. The Rams have shown us they will take those players that have those anomalies, whether it's a 40 time or injury risks or the dude's 25 years old, whatever it might be. They'll take those risks if they believe in the player and believe in the tape. And to me, this is about that range where if you believe in the tape, you're going to take a Kamari Lassiter out of Georgia, who I think fits their style. They love these off-zone style defenses. They keep churning out different head coaches out of their defensive coordinators, but that's the type of structure they like to live in. I mean, I've made this parallel in my cornerback rankings. They took the slow corner out of Georgia and have managed to get starts out of Darion Kendrick as a 6th-round pick in 2022. This is a supremely more talented version of that player. So I think he'd be on their radar around this range. Makes a ton of sense to me. Let's get to pick 53 with the Eagles back up. This is going to be Edgerrin Cooper, linebacker out of Texas A&M. So our second linebacker is off the board here. It's time for the Eagles to invest in this position. And this is a situation where I think he would actually start right away. I don't know how well he's going to, hold on out the gate. He's got a lot to learn, but he is explosive. His upside is fantastic there. Just going to trust Vic Fangio that he's going to kind of make things simpler on him, get him going as a blitzer where he's so fantastic. And, hopefully by the end of the year, as the Eagles are looking towards the playoffs, he can kind of get things under his grasp and start to look like a NFL level linebacker. I know it's, talking crap on Edgerrin Cooper like he sucks or something. It's just the nature of, if you're drafting a linebacker out of college, for the most part, there's just not a lot of guys that are ready to play right away. This is a situation where he's going to have to play, but it could be good for him to have that kind of trial by fire. I'm more just like saying, this is a player that if he is playing week one, expect some learning curves with him. Expect him to guess wrong, to be out of position, and have some whiffs. So that's kind of what I was getting at there with him. Not that I don't believe in what he could be eventually for the Eagles. Then we got the Cleveland Browns. Gonna take Darius Robinson off the board at this point. I mean, they love their rotations on that D-line with Coach Jim Schwartz, and he's going to find a really nice way to use a Darius Robinson here. Honestly, they have a guy that they played and I think got some production because of the scheme and all that talent and the stunts and stuff. Alex Wright was a 3rd-round pick in 2022, someone I just didn't really believe in, and outside of some schemed-up production, I don't know that I do yet. But I think you can put Darius Robinson in that role and expect a lot more, and a guy that can really hold up strong on the edge on early downs. Zadarius Smith has made it pretty clear he doesn't really like playing the run in his tape and in his contract disputes. Agbanyo Okoronkwo is a little bit more of a pass rush specialist. So there's a lot of usefulness you can get out of a Darius Robinson. And he can step inside and rush the passer from the interior if you need that. They also signed Quentin Jefferson from the Jets. So, like, there's a bunch of different spots that you'll be able to get him out on the field. And I think that's who Darius Robinson's going to be in the league. Maybe not a guy that stays in one spot and is a superstar, but finds a bunch of different kind of formations to play in and is a pretty big impact. Then we got Miami Dolphins at 55. We're going to go Chris Jenkins out of Michigan, hoping to get a little bit of that Christian Wilkins replacement. I like how Chris Jenkins plays the run, even if he isn't the biggest guy. There's a little bit of that Christian Wilkins in there, where Wilkins wasn't always this 330-pound nose tackle, but could hold up like one. I don't see the same play strength in Chris Jenkins, but if you got to lose Christian Wilkins, I don't think this is a horrible, strategy to go with Chris Jenkins in the second round. And you can hope that there's some more pass rushing production in there too, because Michigan just didn't really let this guy loose. Great athlete. Flashes a spin move in there, so maybe you can get that out of him. Then we got the Indianapolis Colts up at pick 56. We said this was going to be Kyrie Jackson. It's going to be Kyrie Jackson for the reasons we mentioned. I think would be in competition with Dallas Flowers coming back from injury, in competition for starting work right away in that system. That's just the perfect fit for a big press cover 3 corner like Kyrie Jackson. Then another corner is going to come off the board to Tampa Bay at pick 57. This is Ennis Rakestraw Jr. Think back to what we said about Kool-Aid McKinstry. I see a lot of similar stuff in Ennis Rakestraw, where he's not the biggest guy, he's not the fastest guy, but a very good physical press man corner, not dissimilar to Carlton Davis, who they obviously lost. When you went edge in the first round, you kind of knew they'd be thinking about corner in the second round here. I think it's a good strategy for Tampa, because the corner, like if those top corners are gone for Tampa, the end of the second, early third round is a really good sweet spot for some good corners here. So Rakestraw's coming off the board to Tampa. A couple of just dream scheme fits for Todd Bowles in that defense. Then we got Green Bay up at pick 58. This is where my number one ranked safety, Malik Mustafa, all these safeties, it's just kind of a flavor of the month. What do you prefer? But I do think the floor with Mustafa is right there with Tyke Smith for the highest floor in this draft. Phenomenal football player. Again, I broke him down on the Fully Inflated Football podcast safety rankings if you want to go check that out. It's all time-stamped and everything for you. But love this fit for Mustafa. I think Green Bay is going to get a little bit more into that single high structure that has been lacking in Green Bay, where they've been much more of a 2-high structure. Mustafa is the perfect strong safety for them. You've got some ACC familiarity. Jeff Hafley, their new defensive coordinator, has been coaching against Malik Mustafa as the head coach for Boston College the last 3 years. So a little bit of familiarity there. I think a player he's going to admire and see as a pretty good fit for their defense. Then we got the Houston Texans at pick 59, going to go with Rook Arororo out of Clemson. They've got some veteran answers for now on the interior: Danico Autry, Foley Fatukasi, Tim Settle, Mario Edwards, but no long-term answers of any sort there. So Arororo can get into the mix right away and then eventually potentially become a starter for them. But I think just has a very high floor in general as their third piece for a long time, either way. Then we got Buffalo up at pick 60. Going to go with Cole Bishop, who my high-end pro comp on is Micah Hyde. Very similar in the sense that Micah Hyde was a very fluid, moving coverage slot corner that eventually switched to safety. Cole Bishop played a ton of slot corner at Utah. I think he is the perfect transition into Buffalo's defense. I would peg him as a day one starter for them with Hyde and Poyer gone. Then we got Detroit at pick 61. I'm just going to say right now, before we even reveal their whole draft, I loved what we did for the Detroit Lions. I'm excited to hear from Lions fans after I didn't like their draft last year, but I think we have built a kneecap-biting perfect draft for the Lions here, and that started in the first round with Kool-Aid McKinstry and is going to continue here, I think, with Marshawn Nealand, close to home, the edge out of Western Michigan, who could have left. He could have gone to, Alabama. He could have followed Braden Fisk to Florida State or wherever. But the local donors at Western Michigan wanted him to stay, and he said, okay, I'll stay close to home. But talk about the perfect fit for Detroit's front. Just a smasher, can play 5-tech, defend the run. Very par for the course with like Josh Paschal, who's played but hasn't really connected as a second-round pick. I think Nealon is just a much more explosive player, has a chance to turn into a really good number 2 pass rusher opposite of Aiden Hutchinson. He can step inside and rush from the interior. He just really fits their style and kind of rounds out that defensive line now that has added some pieces, but is still missing just a little bit of an extra punch. They don't need an alpha opposite of Aiden Hutchinson. He is that guy, but just a little bit more juice on the other side there, I think, can absolutely come from Marshawn Nealon. Then at pick 62, the Baltimore Ravens. You could certainly think about offensive line here, but you do have Xavier Legette sitting there. I think him as a bigger bodied vertical threat and a really nice complement to it's not that Zay Flowers isn't a vertical threat, but he's just such a different style of wide receiver with, not the biggest guy, but so quick and good in different areas. Legette and Flowers, that really works for me. And just like we said about in the first round, you could go O-line, but you could also go corner. You could go wide receiver. The Ravens have unfortunately put themselves in a spot where they have a lot of needs, but it also isn't pigeonholing him into reaching on players either. And Xavier Legette at pick 62 is absolutely not a reach. He is a bargain value at this point. So we'll see what kind of O-line help might be there in the third round for the Ravens. Then we got the San Francisco 49ers at pick 63. Going to go with Mike Sainristil now out of Michigan. They've, I think, been looking for that slot corner since they let K'Wan Williams out the door. I see a very similar player in Mike Sainristil. It's actually my pro comp on him, so it makes a ton of sense. They want to live in nickel, but they want a nickel corner that can thump like a linebacker at times. That's going to be Sainristil for them. Then Kansas City up at 64. Did not take a tackle for them at the end of the first, but we are going to do that here and staying close to home in Javon Foster out of Missouri. I have a true third-round grade on Foster. I don't know where he ends up going on draft day, where he's projected by the consensus. I don't really care. I think he's just a really good football player that I'm comfortable enough taking here at the very end of the second round with the tackles that are left on the board for you. Love his hand usage, love his run blocking. I think he's a starter for you at left or right tackle, wherever you feel the need for him. Might not ever be like an all-pro type of tackle with his foot speed can be a little bit average-ish at times, but they've had some guys that are like that with Donovan Smith and Orlando Brown. I think Foster will be just fine for them, considering they're in kind of a dire situation with that tackle room. All right, guys, third round, starting off the Carolina Panthers with a little bit more offensive weaponry. Going to go with Ben Sinnott out of Kansas State. Really explosive dude. He's probably a better version of what they thought they were getting in Tommy Tremble. Not that this is the same regime or anything like that, but good after catch guy, a little bit undersized, but I think can play in line. Willing one run blocker that just needs to work on his technique. I'm a fan, man. I think he would be starting out there ahead of Tommy Tremble within the first season for the Panthers. Good value there. I've got a second or third round grade on Ben Sinnott. Then the Arizona Cardinals up at pick 66. So I know we got Marvin Harrison, but I'm going to keep loading up some weaponry here with a player that has at this point become a value, someone I'm not the biggest fan of, but at this point in the draft, Troy Franklin for the Arizona Cardinals. You've got your deep threat here in Troy Franklin. You have Marv to do everything. You have Michael Wilson, who's a short to intermediate guru. You've got a tight end. We've improved the offensive line. Now things are really heating up for Kyler Murray to kind of retake the league by storm, I guess, here in year 6 or whatever he's in. We get the Washington Commanders at pick 67. Got to get this team some cornerback help. If you haven't looked at their depth chart lately, it ain't looking so hot. We had to help Drake May early with some O-line, but now we're going to look at the defense, bring in Renardo Green, and Dan Quinn gets his physical press man corner here for his defense in Washington. New England Patriots are up at 68. Going to look at this offensive line in Mason McCormick. My best available offensive lineman at this point, not named Zach Zinter, who's just got a little bit of an injury risk. But I also like the potential positional flexibility that you get from McCormick. I think he could turn into a center eventually. David Andrews, 32 years old. His trajectory is not going in the right direction. You're going to put McCormick right away in a competition at right guard, where I think he's just a better prospect than fourth-round year 2 player City So. But if So develops with him and you end up with a good depth situation right now, you will have an eventual long-term replacement for David Andrews. So it was that a little bit of extra center versatility that I think McCormick has over a Zach Zinter that made me go in that direction. And I know that's controversial with our next pick here being Zach Frazier coming right off the board as a center prospect. It's the flexibility that I like, not that I think they necessarily need a center, right? I like the idea that McCormick could be either of those players for the Patriots, but also I'm kind of in an island in that I think McCormick's just a better athlete, more explosive, versatile lineman than Zach Frazier, who the draft world is kind of all over. I'm a little lower on him here, so in this What I Would Do mock draft, he's going to fall into the 3rd round. I don't know if he'll be here or not. I don't think it'd be crazy if he fell because he is a center that's just not a great athlete. But at this point, for the Chargers, he's your Corey Linsley replacement. As low as I am on Zach Frazier, I do think he's a day 1 starter at center. He's tough. He's everything the Chargers are looking for. A very technically sound, smart player. Very Corey Linsley-esque, honestly. And now this Chargers offense is really cooking with gas. The offensive line is loaded up with J.C. Latham and Zinter. You brought in Odunze. Defense is going to need to have some guys step up for sure, but you've really plugged everything you need with the Chargers offense, and you've brought in physical, tough dudes. So Chargers fans, there's your Justin Herbert support that you've been looking for. And then the interior offensive line run is going to continue here with the New York Giants up at pick 70. We're going to take Zach Zinter here. Really talented football player. I think would be more discussed as a top 50 pick if he was able to go through the pre-draft process. He broke his leg in the Ohio State game. So he's on the mend from that, but should be good to go. I think he is definitely being underrated in this draft. And for the Giants, you've got now a pair of Michigan offensive guards, John Runyon, Zach Zinter, who I think would be in a position to win this starting job within his rookie season. Better offensive line coach. Hope to get those strides from John Michael Schmitz. You have Andrew Thomas. You're going to have a competition at right tackle between Evan Neal and Jermaine Illuminor. You've put in Malik Neighbors. You've actually got a real offensive cast in front of Daniel Jones all of a sudden. I think that's doing things the right way. Now the Arizona Cardinals back up. Like I said, when we didn't trade down from the 4th pick, they've got themselves some draft picks. Now, I know we traded down from 27. That definitely helps, but they already have a bunch, and we added more. But with all of those picks, that's where I'm comfortable saying, dude, let's get T'Vondre Sweat in this building. If you can get him on the right course here, get Jonathan Gannon to inspire him with his quirkiness, I suppose, to, stay on top of things off the field, you're stealing a top 35 to 40 player in this draft class and a massive, literally massive need for the Arizona Cardinals. They signed some Band-Aids in free agency, but, Gannon was in that room when they decided to draft Jordan Davis in the top 15. I think T'Vondre Sweat's tape is better than Jordan Davis. He just comes with a little bit more baggage as that premium nose tackle that could potentially be a 3-down nose tackle as a run stuffer obviously, but a pass rusher as well. So it's around the range. I'm starting to take a risk on a guy like Sweat. Then we got the Jets up. We're going to go, as high floor as we can get on the offensive line. We went with Brock Bowers early. Got to think about offensive line here. That's what another reason you can go Brock Bowers is because of all the depth of this tackle class. I know a lot of guys fly off the board in the top 50s, But there's a group of dudes, we took Foster off the board for the Chiefs, Christian Jones, Patrick Paul. Those are three names that I think with this Jets pick at 72, you can buy yourself just enough insurance that, if Tyron Smith does go down, you can get a guy. All those guys have 5 and 6 years of experience. Literally, Foster, Jones, and Paul specifically all have played 5 and 6 years in college football. They have a very high floor as third-round tackle prospects, guys that would be top 10 tackles in the majority of draft classes. So this draft class specifically allows you to take a Brock Bowers and then hopefully just get some insurance for if those guys get hurt for you. Love this pick for the Jets. Then we get the Detroit Lions. As I mentioned, I'm obsessed with this draft class for the Detroit Lions. Jalen Polk is the pick here. Talk about a kneecap biter at wide receiver. This dude run blocks. He wins contested catches. He's tough after the catch. He is 100% the missing wide receiver that the Detroit Lions need. I wouldn't be stunned if they take him with that second round pick, but if he's there at pick 73, my God, you are sprinting this pick to the podium. I'm not the biggest Jalen Polk guy compared to how some people talk about him. Some people have him like top 5, top 7. He's more top 17 in this draft class for me. I think some of the separation and athleticism is missing with him, but they don't need that piece. They need the Josh Reynolds that's going to make the tough catch in the NFC Championship and not choke it away. I think that's Jalen Polk. Then we have the Atlanta Falcons back up at 74. I know we took Laiatu Latu, but we got to keep attacking this edge room. It's been really neglected for far too long. They've missed on some picks. Guys like Arnold Ebiketie just haven't been, he hasn't been able to take that next leap. Zach Harrison was a third-round pick last year. We didn't get to see a ton from him. I'm excited to see what Raheem Morris is going to do with him. But, dude, after those two players on the edge, Lorenzo Carter's in the building. Okay, D'Angelo Malone, another one of these guys they drafted but just hasn't hit. They got James Smith-Williams. Dude, their edge group needs more than just one piece here than Laiatu Latu. So I'm going to take a guy that I think is going to be right in the mix for the number 2 edge in that room right away in Braylon Trice out of Washington. I like that he's kind of clarified that he got sick before the combine, and that's why he ended up, kind of tanking the combine. He weighed in at like 245. On film, he's a powerful player that looks like he's about 260. That all checks out for him. Really high effort, kind of power rush type of profile, really good rip move. He's not the burstiest, fastest, bendiest guy, but as a number 2, opposite of Latu, I think you're getting 2 high floor guys in the building right away in their biggest position of need for this team. Good time to mention too, just like the double dip strategy in general, I think is growing around the league. We've seen like the Ravens when they took Mark Andrews in the 3rd round after they took Hayden Hurst in the 1st. There's tons and tons of examples of teams that like a guy they took in the 1st, but are going to back him up with a 3rd round pick of another talented prospect that they like. You would bring in that competition. You get an extra dart throw within the same year. If you have a need that you got to hit on and you don't have a ton of other needs, it makes sense to spend a couple picks at the same position. All right, Chicago at 75. They didn't get their wide receiver at 9, but I think they're getting a damn good one here in Roman Wilson. Bears fans will like this. My pro comp for him is Randall Cobb, who Bears fans remember Randall Cobb just ripping their hearts out for 5, 6, 7 years with some clutch moments. I see a very similar path with Roman Wilson. I think he's a little overrated by some. Second round in this draft class just seems a little rich for Roman Wilson because I do think he's a slot-only player. But he's going to have a role right away. Keenan Allen obviously can play from the slot, but he'll also play outside. That's when Roman will play. Sometimes you'll play Keenan in the slot, and you can play Tyler Scott outside and get him those vertical looks. So there's room for him in year 1. He's an excellent run blocker as well. So there's definitely a home for him to get some reps, and then in time, he's going to have a more clear trajectory as your starting slot full-time. Then for Denver at 76, I wanted to take advantage of the depth of this center class. went back and forth between Bo Limmer and Cedric Van Pran. I think for Sean Payton's offense, where he wants to have a guy that can really create some drive off the ball to run those traditional power runs, he wants that center like Cushenberry that can provide a little bit more juice off the snap and displace a nose tackle if he has to. So I'm going to go with Bo Limmer over Cedric Van Pran, where I have the same overall grade on those guys. So Bo Limmer to Denver. But with that said, Cedric Van Pran is going to be our next pick to the Cardinals at 77 with that pick we got in the first round trade down with the Raiders. We did take Christian Haynes earlier, but I think we need one more piece in that interior O-line. I think Haynes will be starting somewhere. You have Hjalte Froholt at center, Will Hernandez. They're options. It's not like you have to start Cedric Van Pran right away, but I just think we need to beef up that room, and I love Van Pran's style fit with the Cardinals. You know, we talked about Limmer being a power blocking scheme fit for the Broncos. I like Van Pran as a little bit more of that move blocker, like Arizona wants to be more of that wide zone run blocking system with Drew Petzing in here. Love Cedric Van Pran's quickness off the ball. He didn't test like out the gym, but when Georgia did ask him to reach block, which wasn't a ton, but you could see it, he has a really rangy first step, quick off the ball, excellent get off. I think he fits their system really well. Then pick 78, we got the Washington Commanders are up. In a weird way, the Commanders have not a ton of glaring needs at this point. They signed a bunch of like mid-range, low-end starters so that they could kind of pivot in the draft and just go with what makes sense in these mid-rounds. And I looked at this pick for a while, and I saw a name that kind of hit me like, ooh, I think Cliff Kingsbury could find a use for him. I know we don't give Cliff a ton of credit for being an offensive guru or anything, but Johnny Wilson, wide receiver out of Florida State. Cliff Kingsbury does like to spread him out. He'll go 4 wide receiver packages, or he'll use that undersized tight end. He had a great run with Zach Ertz. But Johnny Wilson, he can play outside certainly, but I like him from the slot as well, where a lot of his good reps were for Florida State. But I think from a usage perspective, it makes sense. But also their depth is lacking all of a sudden. You know, they have Terry McLaurin, they have Jahan Dotson. I like De'Ami Brown, but it hasn't worked out to this point. They could use a new investment at wide receiver, a third-round pick here in a unique type of wide receiver in Johnny Wilson. And it's worth noting that this is the organization. Granted, it's been completely overhauled in terms of staff and ownership and all that. But this is the team that has turned Logan Thomas into a tight end, drafted Armani Rogers, a former quarterback turned tight end, drafted a Cole Turner as a slot wide receiver out of Nevada. And signed Zach Ertz, by the way, who's back here with Cliff Kingsbury. So I'm not saying Johnny Wilson's a tight end. I have actually pounded the table and said, no, he's a wide receiver. And I think there's room for him with Dotson and McLaurin for those guys to really healthily coexist someday. But if it doesn't look good and his skill set and his weird, style of a route runner and his weird physical mold at 6'6", 230 pounds, if it doesn't translate to wide receiver, I think this is an organization that has had a lot of success with the tight end converts. So definitely a lot of reasons to like this as a fit for Washington in the third round. But then we got Atlanta back up again. I think we've filled out the needs so far. There's one spot left that could use a little competition, and that is strong safety, and Jaden Hicks is sitting right there. Perfect kind of value. Don't love his ability as a deeper safety and a coverage guy. Well, guess what? You have Jesse Bates back there to be your free safety. I think Jaden Hicks can do too high if you want to rotate into cover 2 or cover 4, but love him if they want to be a single high team. I would think they want to be with Jesse Bates. That's why you have Jesse Bates, is to run cover 3 and cover 1 and let him ball hawk over the middle of the field. Then you just put Jaden Hicks down in the box where he's at his best. Bam, perfect fit. Then we got the Bengals up at pick 80. Another kind of draft and develop type of strategy for the Bengals. I don't know why these are what I would do mock drafts, but my mind always tends to go with the Bengals kind of philosophy where they're looking a year or two down the road. The pick here is Mason Smith out of LSU. But I think that's just their team building philosophy showing out externally as well. I think you definitely project interior defensive line as something that could use help now, but losing DJ Reader, now that's a group that needs to be replenished. Mason Smith's an interesting guy. I think he needs a good culture that's going to kind of keep him focused and on the right development track. I think the Bengals with Lou Anarumo and the culture that Joe Burrow and Coach Taylor have helped build there is really special. His upside is phenomenal. His upside is literally Chris Jones with his traits. So he's not going to hang around in the draft too much longer beyond this point because somebody's going to want to gamble on it. I think for the Bengals is a pretty good spot where he doesn't have to play right away, but you could hit a home run on a third-round pick. Then we got the Seattle Seahawks at pick 81. Peyton Wilson is still there. It has become a value at this point. I'm not the biggest Peyton Wilson guy. I am worried about his size, his durability, and his most importantly, his run defense. But here in Seattle, where he's not going to have to play right away, he's got this great coach in Coach McDonald, who's going to find a way to use his skill set, whether that's as a blitzer or, hell, dude, if you want Peyton Wilson to just play at 220 pounds and just be Kyle Hamilton for this defense, shit, man, if they're creative enough to do it and Peyton Wilson wants to just play in space and be that guy, that just might be his highest ceiling, is in that role as like a slot corner weak side linebacker like Kyle Hamilton. So there's some paths for him to have some success here in Seattle. Then we got Indianapolis up at pick 82. I'm going to take Leonard Taylor, the defensive tackle out of Miami. I ended up liking him a little bit more than I thought he would. I did think Miami did a pretty poor job in his final year, kind of setting him up for playmaking success. Saw a lot of double teams as a nose tackle. Also, they, as a pass rusher, were putting him on stunts and loops and games all the time instead of letting him rush one-on-one and work on that skill set. So there's definitely some stuff missing in his evaluation, but he is incredibly rocked up, makes a lot of good plays against the run. Put him behind Grover Stewart and behind DeForest Buckner, give him a year or two to grow in that defense. I think he could be an eventual starter for them. If nothing else, I think he could be a, good backup where they are missing some interior talent, to say the least. Then the Rams at pick 83, going to get them some offensive line developmental talent here in Kieran Amagaji out of Yale. They have Alaric Jackson and Joe Noteboom, Warren McClendon, who they took in the 5th round last year. I do think they have enough to survive out there, and Alaric Jackson started a lot of games for them last year and was okay. So you're not in a position where Amagaji has to play right away, but he does have really good traits. I think this is about where I'm comfortable with him. And that's a good environment where he might surprise down the road. If he doesn't, I think it was a risk worth taking for a position of premium value there. Right tackle is going to open up as a need at some point too, because Rob Havenstein's not getting any younger. So time to beef up that group for sure. Then we have the Steelers up at pick 84. Going to take one of my ultimate guys here, Hunter Nauerzad out of Penn State. There you go, Steelers. There's your offensive line help. Huge fan of this guy's game. I think everybody that eventually gets to Hunter Nauerzad is saying, wow, this guy looks really good. He looks like a 3rd-round prospect. Why is nobody talking about him? I keep seeing people tweet about that over the last couple of weeks. That was my reaction in February when I happened to watch him, because I did him when I did Olu Fashanu's eval. Everything seems to check out for him. He's not the best athlete. He's not the strongest guy, but he's above average at both. Like his length for a center. I would say will be in the mix for a starting interior job for the Steelers almost immediately. And they'd be able to develop him too, because that's what the Steelers do. All right, Cleveland Browns at 85. This pick I really, really struggled with. I actually originally had a quarterback here for them, but I just don't know if that guy is going to make the team, because they do have former Pro Bowler Tyler Huntley and YOLO Ball Winston there. I think both will make the team. So I struggle to find a home for a quarterback here, even though I think if I'm Cleveland, I'm going to continue to invest in a quarterback. So it was something I thought about, but I'm going to go with Cedric Gray, the linebacker out of North Carolina. Really a high floor linebacker, which you don't say that about a lot of linebacker prospects. Balanced player, balanced protection. Don't know that he'll ever be a superstar, but a little bit of Anthony Walker going on there, who they've had in the building. Walker's no longer there. They replaced him with, Jordan Hicks, Devin Bush. they need some more pieces in that linebacker room, and the rest of their roster is really in a pretty good spot. Then at 86, the Houston Texans back up. TJ Tampa is not off the board yet. I'm just not the biggest TJ Tampa guy, but I do think at this point he's a good option for Houston. They need some more outside corner help. We took them some kind of slot corner / strong safety help earlier. But yeah, just good competition. I think we'll come in and compete with Jeff Okudah right away. More of a zone corner, whereas Okudah's more man-focused, so that'll be an interesting battle there. But I do think there's talent there. There's ball skills and instincts, but I just don't love the athleticism and just didn't really see it with TJ Tampa that a lot of people talk about him as a top 50 player. I'm like, I don't know. He's solid. He's a big, smart corner. I'm pretty sure that D'Amico Ryans can find a use for that kind of player. Then we have the Indianapolis Colts at pick 87, staying in the AFC South. This was part of the trade down in the second round. This pick belonged to the Dallas Cowboys, but Chris Braswell is going to be the pick here. Another guy I'm not quite as high on as this top 50 player that people talk about. He's got a great bull rush, but I think when he gets to the NFL, it's going to go from a great bull rush to a good bull rush, and then I was underwhelmed by the rest of his game. I thought as a run defender, he was a little bit underwhelming, and the rest of his pass rushing tool belt was underwhelming. But I do think there's still some room for growth in his game. And for the Colts, like that edge room, I think they need to continue like taking swings at that group. Kwity Paye hasn't really worked out. Samson Abukam's not going to be there forever. Lewis and Adeyingbo are the bigger bodied types for them, but we're towards the end of the third round. Things are going to start to get a little bit less exciting, but I do think the value is there on Braswell, and it's worth taking a flyer on him. If nothing else, he's going to be a very good third edge rusher in the league, which is not a bad pick for a late third round pick. Then we get the Green Bay Packers up at pick 88, staying home in Wisconsin with the guy who my pro comp on is pissed off A.J. Dillon, and that is Braylon Allen. I do think Green Bay wants to get into a lot of gap stuff this year. I think the power style will translate. You're keeping them close to home. This feels like about as good of a fit as you could find for a Braylon Allen. And right now, A.J. Dillon is the backup to Josh Jacobs. I think they're going to give Jacobs a very heavy workload, but if he goes down for a game or two, or if you got to give the backup 5 or 6 carries a game, I would much rather that guy be Braylon Allen than A.J. Dillon, who I just was honestly very underwhelmed when Green Bay decided to bring him back because he was one of the worst-looking running backs in the league last year. So I think it's still a need despite signing Josh Jacobs. And then Tampa Bay up at pick 89. This pick for me is going to be Jermaine Burton, the wide receiver out of Alabama. I actually think Tampa Bay has a very good culture with Todd Bowles, and Baker Mayfield actually I think is a guy that receivers want to be in the building with and put in the work with. And I think Jermaine Burton just needs to stay focused and mature, but there's incredible value there. You also have as good of mentors in the room as you could possibly ask for. Mike Evans, certified good guy. Chris Godwin is a really just, head down, hardworking guy. So I think you're surrounding Jermaine Burton in a situation where he can play a little bit, right? They have Trey Palmer as their third wide receiver and then really not a whole lot of anything else. So he can get on the field, but he's going to have to work for it. And over time, man, like Chris Godwin is not going to be around forever. Mike Evans obviously not going to be around forever. So I do think investing in some wide receiver is a good idea for Tampa. And this just felt like a good home for him. In Tampa. Then we got the Arizona Cardinals. This is going to be Braden Fisk out of Florida State. This is the type of value range I have on Braden Fisk. I know he might go in the top 50 of the draft. We'll see. I broke him down in my defensive tackle video. I just was so underwhelmed by his tape and how people talk about him, not really translating to the production. He's a 6-year player out of Florida State. He's undersized. He's got really short arms. He doesn't defend the run well. He's a splash play defensive tackle. I think as a rotational guy that you just kind of move around and tell him to shoot gaps and try to create some disruption and blow up runs in the backfield. Maybe you luck into a good pass rush rep where that quickness and get off does translate to an early win from Braden Fisk. Arizona's a good spot for him because Jonathan Gannon loves to rotate his defensive tackles. He's going to play a guy like Braden Fisk 15, 20 snaps a game. But I just don't really see a starter in Braden Fisk. So I did think this was a good home schematically for him. He's like an elevated version of Dante Stills, who got a lot of playing time last year because this D-line was such a joke. So he's a much better version of that role in this defense. But yeah, I really have tempered expectations for this player, especially compared to where other people talk about him. Green Bay at 91, wanted to get them another linebacker in the building, Jeremiah Trotter. I don't know that he's going to take the starting job in year one. I actually kind of like Isaiah McDuffie in that role, who played with the defensive coordinator 4 years ago at Boston College. But you don't know if you're going to re-sign that player. So I do think Trotter as a day one backup and maybe a starter next year does make a lot of sense. Young player, a true junior out of Clemson. Seems to fit the mold for Green Bay. Then Tampa Bay back up at pick 92. I wanted to improve this running back room. I love Rachaad White, but he does have 2 years left on his contract. But I think you can get a more reliable runner of the football in there as well. Someone that's going to make the most of well-blocked runs. That's really not Rachaad White. It's tough because he's so good in the receiving game, but so underwhelming as a runner. And I just look at Blake Corum and I'm like, yeah, that dude's a no-nonsense better running back than Rachaad White. Now, White's a more explosive receiving threat than Corum, but I do think you can try to find the right balance there with these two players. And, for fantasy football, it's going to be a frustration because Rachaad White's like a PPR monster. But I think for the Tampa Bay Bucks, it's going to put Baker Mayfield in a lot less of those 2nd and 9, 3rd and 10s because, those 2-yard runs are turning into 5-yard runs a lot more consistently with a Blake Corum in the building. Then we got the Ravens back up at 93. We are going to get them that offensive line help now. Patrick Paul is the last of that group of high floor tackles that we were talking about. Patrick Paul, probably the lowest floor of the Christian Jones and Javon Foster grouping there as third-round grades, but I do like the experience he has, the length he has. I think he's a solid player, and you're putting yourself in a spot now where you can really let this be a competition between, I would just say, 4 adequate options in Patrick McCarry, who's had good time as a tackle. Daniel Falele in year 3 has freaky tools. Is he going to be ready? They signed Josh Jones from Houston as a very underrated signing. And now Patrick Paul. That's 4 options. You think the Baltimore Ravens, with their coaching and their development, are going to be able to settle on one of those guys as an option for them at right tackle. Then we got the Niners up at 94. I went with Cade Stover, the tight end out of Ohio State, a very solid player. Kind of your classic possession tight end. This is not really to replace George Kittle, though George Kittle's not getting any younger. This is more about, look, last year they spent a 3rd-round pick on Cameron Latu. I thought was an egregious overdraft chasing a run of tight ends. I thought Latu was a 6th-round prospect. Didn't understand that. And then Braden Willis was a 7th-round pick. They lost Charlie Werner, who was that 12 personnel guy for them. I think Cade Stover is a much more real prospect. We've seen the Niners very quickly right their wrongs when they draft incorrectly, right? Trey Lance, they wrote the wrong with Brock Purdy. They've done that with their running back room as well. Wouldn't be surprised if they're willing to do that pretty quickly with that tight end room. That I thought especially the Cameron Latu pick in the 3rd round last year was just honestly a pathetic overdraft by this front office that makes a pick every year that just makes me want to pull my hair out. But let's get to Kansas City at pick 95. I did go with Javon Baker here. I know we took Ladd McConkey in the first, but now we're going to get another kind of talented vertical option in here. I think this is protection to the fact that you very well might lose Hollywood Brown. I mean, really think about it. I think Hollywood Brown could have an absolute monster season for Kansas City. I'm talking 1,600, 1,700 yards, 10 touchdown type of I'm about to get $27 million type of season. And I just don't know if Kansas City can follow up the Chris Jones contract and pay that player. It was a 1-year deal for Hollywood Brown. I think Baker can be a vertical threat for the Chiefs. He doesn't have the same speed, but he could be a little bit more of that perimeter vertical option down the road. It's also the double dip strategy, right? If Ladd McConkey can't stay healthy or whatever, you feel pretty good about the Ladd pick, but I do think Baker fits in with their existing weaponry as well. So it's just more talent in a wide receiver room that heading into the draft features Rashee Rice, who just got a severe off-the-field situation. He's going to be okay, but it happened. Marquise Brown, and then you're looking at Justin Watson, Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore, Montrell Washington. Like, this team can afford to draft 2 wide receivers. I think that's pretty fair to say. Then we got Jacksonville at pick 96. I went with Tyler Nubin. I think he's just becoming a little bit of a value at this point. He's a very solid safety. Right now, their room is looking at Andre Sisco, good player, coming up on a contract, but Antonio Johnson might even just be a slot corner for them, unproven. Daniel Thomas, Andrew Wingard not getting any younger. I felt like that safety room needed some more pieces, and Nubin is pretty close, if not at the top of my best player available board right now. So just kind of probably some future planning there. I don't know how much he'll play in year 1, but he could very well win the second safety job in that room as well. So Tyler Nubin to the Jags, then the Bengals at 97. Look, I know I'm like beating a dead horse here. I did not do this intentionally with all these guys that are basically not going to play in year 1 or our future planning picks for the Bengals. But Austin Booker out of Kansas. For one, it's just this is best player available at the chance to hit a home run on a pass rusher in Booker that has some really explosive flashes on his film. He's a really young player, but you look at that edge group. I know they spent the first round pick on Miles Murphy last year, and that's great. He's a part of the plan, obviously. But Trey Hendrickson is not getting any younger and coming up on a contract. If you really like what you see from Austin Booker, you got a little bit of leverage to be like, you know what, let's pay T. Higgins and let Trey Hendrickson go. I'm not saying that's for sure going to happen, but it opens that up as a potential avenue for you. But you also have Sam Hubbard getting older. I don't know he's got to be coming up at the end of his contract. And then Cam Sample and Joseph Asai are coming up on the last year of their contracts. So Booker's not going to play at all in year 1, but that's kind of what you want to do with him anyway. And then it just gives you a ton of flexibility down the road. I think, let's say Hendrickson and Miles Murphy are your starters in 2025. Booker could be your next guy off the bench and a really explosive, like designated pass rusher that you can do some stuff with. So I think it is redundant with the sort of way that the Bengals draft, but they do that for a reason, right? It gives them a lot of flexibility to build this team up. Pittsburgh Steelers at 98. I wanted to give them some more secondary help. I went with Max Melton, cornerback out of Rutgers. I like Max Melton. I don't love Max Melton. I think he's really quick. He's smart. He's physical. He's just on the smaller side of things. I thought his tape was up and down, but definitely at the end of the 3rd round for a team like the Steelers that just needs some more speed and youth in that secondary does make sense. Then we get the Rams at pick 99. I like this pick a lot. We're going to go with Spencer Rattler, the quarterback out of South Carolina here. 2-year development plan behind Matthew Stafford with Sean McVay. I could see it, man, as a 3rd-round pick. Spencer Rattler gets an opportunity in there. Stafford is a guy that's been known to miss some time. If Spencer Rattler's going to hit, this would be about of a best case scenario for him and his agent. For him to work out long term. And then we wrap things up. Washington Commanders, pick 100. Going to swing for the fences with a cornerback here with a ton of traits. Decamarion Richardson out of Mississippi State. You load up that depth chart. There is room for a draft and stash freak like Richardson. Guys that move like this just don't last very long in the NFL draft. You're hoping with Dan Quinn and a good coaching staff there, they can get something out of him in a couple years. Bonus points as well. You reunite him with Emmanuel Forbes, was their 1st-round pick out of Mississippi State last year. So you're creating a good competition between those two super athletes. We'll see who comes out on top. But there you have it, a 3-round mock draft. Did not hold back on how long this thing was going to be. I don't know. I've been recording for probably about 2 hours, so we'll see. We'll see where this thing comes out. If you're still watching, thank you for not just watching this video, but all of this draft season. This is going to be one of the last, if not the last, videos here for this draft process before the start of the draft and the draft stream. I might post the draft mailbag episode of the podcast here on this channel and the podcast channel, but make sure you're following the Fully Inflated Football podcast channel as well, because there's certainly going to be one more answering your mailbag questions episode here before the draft. Again, we're doing 7-round mock drafts throughout the week on Patreon as well for all 32 teams. If you just can't get enough mock drafting, head over there, check it out, support the channel. We're going to go out of here, get some hot tea, patch up the voice, do some 7-round mocks, finish up some scouting. We are in the home stretch, baby. I appreciate you guys as always. Hit that like button on the way out. It really does help, but we'll see you for the next one. Peace out.